Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us live and online from Art Rooney Stadium up on the bluff at Duquesne University for today's Midwest Division matchup in the AUDL of the visiting Chicago Wildfire and your Pittsburgh Thunderbirds. This is the second broadcast of Radio 41.2 The Bird. We are audio only today, although we will be syncing up this audio with the video we're taking of the game, and you can see that tomorrow probably on our Facebook page. So look forward to that. But tonight, I'll be your eyes and your ears, so you sit back and relax baseball style as we bring you this game between the 1-0 Thunderbirds and the 0-0 Chicago Wildfire. Last year, the Wildfire only notched 3 more wins than the none that they have right now. They haven't played a game yet. But fact of the matter is, they are a very, very different team than they used to be. They have picked up a number of critical additions in the offseason. And first and foremost among them is number 1 on their roster, Kurt Gibson. And he is probably going to have the disc in his hands pretty soon because they are on the field with the disc right now. The pull came down into the end zone. Pavel Giannis swings it over to Simon Johansson. Giannis gets it back in their territory, but moving it quickly between these two players. Here on the home sideline, Alex Thomas matched up on Giannis. And Giannis slings one out into the middle of the field, and they're right at about midfield. And the disc is thrown to Gibson's. First time he's touched the disc, and he sends it to his forehand side. Mike Pardo's got it. Pardo, Gibson, and Giannis they're really running a two-handler set right now. And it's Gibson to Pardo. Pardo sends one up to Giannis, and just like that, with only 30 seconds or so gone in the first period, Chicago notches the first goal, and it's 1-0. And these two guys are really remarkable handlers. I talked to Coach Adrian King before the game about having guys like Pavel Giannis, who I think led the league in touches last year, and Kurt Gibson, who isn't really just a handler. He's a hybrid player. He's arguably the best male player in the world and can do pretty much anything. And so, having these two guys being able to swing the disc back and forth between each other and find guys downfield, why, it's just hard to imagine how anybody's going to contain an offense like that. The other thing is they've picked up some targets who are going to be tough to cover downfield. One of the biggest ones is going to be Nate Goff. He played for Rowley last year. He's going to be a big offseason acquisition. But even more than that, number 25, former Madison Radical Ross Barker, who is a speedster. Disc is in the hands of Jimmy Toll now. The Wildfire pulled it. Trucks Trimble has it on the home sideline. He sends one up to... tough one there. That one bounced off of the hands of Owen Watt. It was right in his hands, and he looked up, and it just fell out of his hands. So at midfield now, the Wildfire have the disc, and Nate Goff's got it. He sends it back to Max Trotter. So this defensive team of the Wildfire, with two handlers and a kind of loose vertical stack downfield, breaking out of that is Carl Kingma. Kingma has the disc. They are just inside the red zone now, but Sam Van Dusen takes Kingma's pass away. Not sure who he intended it for because the only receiver there was Van Dusen. Van Dusen sends it up to Trucks Trimble, and now it's flanking him, but he finds John Mast in the middle of the field. David Vatz, human backwards hat, first game this season at midfield, slings it over to Mast. Mast finds an in-cutting Max Shepard. They're in the attacking zone. Shepard being marked by Kingma, and then a dipsy doodle cut by Jonathan Mast. He fooled his man, Nick Zeman, but then he threw it right at Mr. Goff. And so just like that, a turnover. The O team's going to have to get it back. Looks like there's some discussion on the field. Our officiating crew today is Brian Heim, head referee, Trevor Bauer, Neil Donovan, and Andrew Miller. They get into it right away, but it doesn't look like there was a consequential call. An inside out goes up from Trotter to Goff, and then he throws a forehand huck out into space in front of Jack Shea, who lays out and misses it in the far corner of the end zone. He would have had a spectacular layout goal there. Ended up not being able to quite corral it. And now on the far sideline, Van Dusen sends it up to Mast. He puts one into the middle to Shepard, who's back into his accustomed role of yards gaining cutter and then handler after that. Dave Vatz pulls it in at midfield and then sends out a backhand. Trucks and Goff making for it. Trucks goes up at the same time as Goff, And Trucks had position, but Goff just closed it up. And he is a shutdown defender from the South Division last year. He showed why. Because Trucks probably against most other defenders would have simply boxed out and run that down. But Goff was too fast for him. Now Max Trotter has it and sends it deep to Nick Zeman. Max Shepard trailing him. Disc is hanging up there, but not long enough for Shepard to close up the ground. And now, with 2 minutes gone, it's 2-0 Chicago. So Thunderbirds able to move the disc and able to force some turnovers early on. Chicago got off the bus not too long ago because they had a flat tire on their way here, but not able to follow through all the way and put the disc in the end zone. So far, some missed opportunities, and not something that is too surprising because, as I said last week, we've got guys trying to step into new roles this year. Jimmy Toll, for instance. Guys like Van Duzen and Mass trying to fill the role that, let's say, Patrick Earls or Max Thorne would have last year. But enough about the past. Let's focus on the right now. 10-10 left in the first quarter, and a low line drive pull that's going to come down about 10 yards outside of the Thunderbirds' end zone, and it is centered to Eddie Peters, new coach of Pittsburgh's women's club team, Hot Metal, the #1 club team, and he sends one up to Sam Van Duzen, who zings one out to cutting Jimmy Toll, who was cutting away towards the east end zone here, but it just had too much mustard on it, and Jimmy, who had his man Simon Johansson beat, was unable to catch up with the disc. Jimmy on the mark right now, and Johansson picks it up, sends it to Alex Rummelhart, Chicago mainstay. Disc still right there on the goal line. Egan floats one out to Dan Vacheroth. Vacheroth being marked by Kenny Ferdella, and Van Duzen running a hard mark. Jimmy Toll lays out in front of the receiver on a centering pass, but didn't get the block, and at that point, Chicago called timeout. So they're going to try to seize a 3-0 lead and bring their offensive team out on the field. Meanwhile, looking for the Thunderbirds to send out their defensive team. Little note on personnel tonight. One familiar face that we won't see on the field is Captain Mark Fedorenko. He was in Spring League last night, and he told me that he has a first degree, it's the least severe strain of his hamstring. And so he's a no-go tonight, and that's a big loss for the Thunderbirds. Fedchko has developed over the past 3 years from, a guy who was mostly a grinder to a guy who went from being, mostly a defensive player to one who was able to gain yards with his cuts and dish the disc off to a guy who is able to step into a handling role sometimes. He's now a captain of this team. He'll be out. But in the game, and he has never missed an AUDL game, is Ethan Beardsley, the Birdman. And Ethan, his streak continues tonight despite the fact that he had his wisdom teeth out yesterday. I don't know how much wisdom he's showing by being out here, and I don't know how many painkillers he ate before. But, when I talked to Pat Ammons, he said, well, we're probably not going to have Ethan. And Andrew Gardner, the GM, said, Ethan's questionable. And the only guy who didn't think it was questionable was Ethan. Chicago now on a vertical stack to put the disc in play. Giannis being marked by Eddie Peters, and he cranks one up to Mike Pardo going deep. Chasing it down. Whoa! A heck of a block there. And I'm trying to get the number of the truck that got that block. That might be Adnan Raslin. I can't tell because these guys won't wear their jerseys. That's 55, and that's nobody's jersey. But that's Raslin. Was that Raslin, Maddie? Yep. Okay. Maddie Francis, Thunderbirds PA announcer, says, yeah, I was right. That's Adnan Raslin. Adnan is a doctor. And let's see what happens here if Jimmy Toll can operate on these two guys deep. Oh, my goodness. He was deep against, there was a deep throw that went up, and with him was Mike Pardo and Simon Johansson. Both those guys have got, looks like 4 or 5 inches on him, and he got his hand on the disc first, but he wasn't able to bring it in. And so now, far away from us on the righty forehand sideline, the Wildfire have the disc. They're about 5 yards from their goal line. Mo Jada on the mark, and now Kenny Ferdella, number 25 for Chicago, centers the disc to Nicky Galino. He sends it back to Pardo, working it up, still in their own zone. working very, very hard against Kenny Fردella. Now the disc is brought down by Ross Barker. Barker sends it to Galena. Still in their own end, but getting close to midfield. And Eddie Peters putting on a tough D on Giannis, but we talked a little bit to Coach about that. Now a quick double team as Fردella comes over to help, and then Danny Miller picks up the disc and sends it deep. And all by himself, running deep, is number 1, Kirk Gibson. First impact in this game, he lays out in the end zone. He had his man beat by a good 20 yards, and the only opponent he had was the momentum of that disc, and he caught up to it. And so the Thunderbirds fall behind 4-0, 7:38 left in this game. Or I'm sorry, in this first period. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but if the Thunderbirds can't manage to put the disc in the end zone soon, Chicago will run away with this game in the first period. So a nice block by Adnan Raslin. Showed he was able to get up. He really climbed the ladder and knocked it out the back of the end zone. But the Thunderbirds, again, unable to convert. Probably an ill-advised huck sent up to Jimmy Toll. And Jimmy was the small man in that troika that gathered underneath the disc and still got his hand on it, but was heavily pressured. The O team out on the field right now. Beardsley, Trucks, Shepard fields the disc, flanked by Jonathan Mast, who he centers it to, and Sam Van Duzen. Rounding it up is David Vatz. And over on the far side, it looks like it's Owen Watt. Oh, my goodness. A pass, an in-cut to David Vatz, and Max Trotter ran past him, laid out in front of him. Now the disc at midfield. Trotter gets it in front of Vatz. They're in the attacking zone. Goff has it, being marked by Van Duzen. Centers it back into the middle. And off it goes across the field. Nick Zeman has it. Max Trotter making an in-cut for him, and it's centered. Throws a lateral throw. Vatz marking him. He breaks the mark. And into the end zone, Jack Shea lays out, catches it, and we'll see the signal from the referee. It is a goal. Oh, no. Sorry, my mistake. Called out of bounds. So Max Shepard picks it up. Thunderbirds get into a vertical stack, and Shepard cranks it deep. Trucks Trimble. He's being marked by Kingma, and then running in is Goff with his, I think, second block of the game. Knocks it down in the middle of their attacking zone. Goff picks it up, sends it over to number 4, Matt LeMater. LeMater looking downfield. He's marked by Watt, but he finds a receiver, and then the disc comes up to Nick Zeman across the midfield line. Nifty inside out, looking for LeMater, but he couldn't quite track it down. Probably didn't have enough float on it. So the Thunderbirds get the disc back, and they have it on the righty backhand end zone cone, the front pylon. So they've got 80 yards to go, and to begin that journey, Jonathan Mast picks it up, and he's marked right away by Dave Woods. Now the disc is in the end zone in the hands of Sam Van Duzen. Thunderbirds have been launching it, but mostly because their cutters look tired. They're working very hard already, and to no avail. It's still, scoreboard says 3-0, and I'm going to trust that's the score I counted for, but I might be wrong. And now Max Shepard trying to throw one to Scott Trimble and try to run as he's throwing that forehand around his mark. He just bounces it in the turf. He turfs it. So Trotter's going to pick it up, and he's marked by Dave Vatz, centers it to Goff. Goff continues to break. It's over there. LeMater has it, and it looks like there might have been a pick call. My mistake. Matty Francis tells me it's a travel call. And so they'll move it back to just 5 yards past midfield, still in the Thunderbirds attacking zone. And the O team's going to try to clamp down and get it back. Max Trotter laces one inside out to Jack Shea, gains about 15 yards. They're on the doorstep and just inside the red zone. Max Trotter slings a forehand over, and Woods has it, looking for Goff. Goff in the corner. He's all by himself, and now the score really is 4-0. 5 minutes left to go, and it has been all Chicago all the time. Wanted to say hello to some of the folks who are listening. Anson Reprimand, my friend, Madison Radical now, but longtime Thunderbird, and his sisters, Dara and Shayna, and some of the rest of the Reprimand clan, still mainstays here at the game, even though they don't have Anson to watch. Anson, we miss you, buddy. Sent me a message through Thunderbird's trainer, Donald Robinson of Global Human Performance, and we'll talk more about Donald soon. But let me say, just say that Anson send that message right back to you. Love you, brother, and we wish that we had the air traffic controller still patrolling our skies, but hope that the skies are clear out there in Madison, and just sending our best to you, and hope to see you back home here in Pittsburgh sometime soon. Meanwhile, Thunderbirds 0-2 team coming on. Maybe a little more speed in this lineup. Alex Thomas, AT out there, Mo Diata, and wearing Mark Fedorenko's jersey, because he can't find his own, is the Diesel, John Diamichis. Raslin making an in-cut. Eddie Peters behind Fridella. He's being marked by Giannis. Now AT has the disc, and he sends one safely up to Mo Diata. Mo's got it and sends it in the direction of Alex Thomas, who is submarined by the guy that they call Bruno. His name is Makalalid, Ben Makalalid. He says, "Just call me Bruno." And Thomas had to cut off his angle, and he is called for a foul on that one, Makalalid. And so Bruno now marking AT. He sends one floating into the end zone right in front of Fridella. He didn't mean to float it past him. He did, and Fridella adjusted, turned on the disc, tracked it down with a little bit of a mini layout just to make sure, and the Thunderbirds get on the board with 4:16 left in the first quarter. So 0-2, which of course is the chemical symbol for oxygen, and 0-1 needed a breather, and 0-2 gave it to him, and big props to AT and Mo Diata. Mo Diata went out there, and both of those guys are defenders primarily, and they're speedsters, not necessarily known for their weapons with their throws, but that time they got the job done. Alex Thomas taking one for the team, cutting off the defender who was laying out at the time, who took his legs out, and now we're going to get to see D1 team come out. John Buss has the disc in his hands. Looks like we got Jordan Robarge out there. See who else is on this team. Number 83, Steve May. Adds a little height to the lineup. And the pull is a long one, or a high one. Comes down about 15 yards out, and Pavel Giannis has it in the middle of the field, throwing some nifty fakes. Chicago in a horizontal stack, and Giannis and Galina playing catch. Sorry, I want to say that name is Galini, and I got it wrong. Giannis has it back, and he pops one through to Gibson. Gibson commanding the field, fakes some hammers over Fridella. And now Galini has it again. So we got kind of a four-handler set here. Miller now runs back downfield. And these guys content to gain 5 yards at a time in direct traffic. Giannis flips one through the Thunderbird zone right now, and they're playing that kind of flat zone. They don't necessarily always put a mark on in the middle of the field, and they're just trying to force these guys to throw around them. And that's exactly what Gibson does. Gets it to Pardo, and now it is just thrown directly at, looks like it was Pat Mack who came down with that one, Pat McMullen. And so Thunderbirds get a block. And now John Buss has it, sends it back to McMullen. And Thunderbirds are matched up man-to-man here against these Wildfire. And John Buss sends up an inside out, which is going to find its way into the hands of number 84, Donkey, Dave Angeletti. And now one floated in front of May, and that was a good-looking throw. Diamichis threw up a backhand to an away-cutting May towards the goal line, and the wind just caught it and knocked it down, unfortunately, because it looked good to me. Now at midfield, the disc is suddenly in the hands of Ross Barker, and then he sends it back to Giannis, back in the Chicago half of the field. And he pops a hammer over the defense, and now Kurt Gibson has it. They're in the red zone. He sends it up to Barker, and then Gibson cuts into the end zone. Giannis has it now, and again, happy to play catch with each other. Sends it across the field to Pardo, and still playing this loose zone here, hoping for another mistake like they got last time. Pardo has the disc, throws a scuba over the top. It finds a target in Simon Johansson, and with 2 minutes left in the first quarter, it's 5-1 Chicago. So again, opportunities for the Thunderbirds. It's not as if they're unable to move the disc. They have been able to find open players, particularly when, 0-2 or D1 gets the disc. But they were referring to the second offensive team and the first defensive team. They've been able to move it, but there always seems to be a spanner in the works, as the English would say. A wrench, a monkey wrench gets thrown into the machine, and, suddenly the Thunderbirds find themselves playing defense again. And I can see they're already pretty winded. And I got to tell you, they've looked ready to strike in a number of situations, but little errors. And I guess, when the wind knocks down a pass like Diesel's, it's not a coincidence. Diamichis is increasingly an offensive weapon, but he's not an experienced thrower compared to some of these other AUDO players. And so, you don't always gauge the wind properly. Meanwhile, Sam Van Dusen, approaching midfield, gets the disc, slings a backhand to Ethan the Birdman Beardsley, and now Watt has it deep into the Wildfire territory, and he finds Jimmy Toll with a backhand, about a 25-yarder. And Jimmy Toll making what was a break cut, but it wasn't much of a break throw because there was no mark on there for Owen Watt. And Owen just sends that backhand out, and then Sam Van Dusen goes out to congratulate Jimmy Toll. Jimmy's a great story early in the season, role player last year, and a captain this year, and we saw last week against the Mechanics, increasingly an important part of the Thunderbirds' offense. And right there, he timed that cut perfectly. So some of that offense that we've seen the Thunderbirds play for 60 yards or so, they were able to just complete there and bring the score to 5-2, 1:44 left. Love to say hello to our friends from Chicago who are listening into the broadcast. You'll be able to see this game tomorrow online, hopefully with this audio superimposed over some video. For right now, I can just tell you that Paul Villanis picks up the disc around his 15, and then almost to midfield, Kirk Gibson gets an in-cut. Mo Diata marking him, and now Eddie Peters on Giannis. Giannis slings it up to Pardo at midfield. I'm sorry, that's Barker. Barker sends it on a centering pass to Giannis, who gives it back to him. And now he shelves one, and it's going out of bounds, and Gibson is kind of looking at it like he might try a greatest, but it floats out of bounds about midway towards the Thunderbirds' goal line, about the 20-yard line for the Thunderbirds. And Kenny Friedel is going to pick it up. Galini on him. Working against a hard-working Giannis is Eddie Peters, and we get a whistle, and it might be that Giannis is going to get whistled here for trying to obstruct Peters' cut. There's pointing and talking. Nope. Maybe it was a push-off because the Thunderbirds are marching backwards. So there's a little contact between Giannis and Peters, and it looks like it might have been Peters. Now, running away on that swing cut is Peters, who lays out to corral it. Still pretty much on their goal line, and the disc is sent up to Alex Thomas. Thomas looks like he's going to launch one. He's quickly double-teamed, but he snakes it out to Eddie Peters, and he pops a backhand up that AT jumps up in front of Diamichis. And now we got two guys going deep, Galini and Pardo, both of them chasing it. And Pardo, as Galini lays out, Pardo just reaches up, grabs it, brings it back to the goal line, and sends it out to, can't quite get the number of that truck, but it looks like it might be Goff. And another goal with 7 seconds left.
Goal scored for number 11, Nate Goff.
Yeah, Nate Goff pulled that one in at 6-2. And that was just unfortunate. That throw went up. Alex Thomas jumped up, and probably Diamichis would have been able to pull it in. I think it was to Thomas originally. It was right about midfield, and it was just a backhand that Peters, I think, shelved and sort of sent it up, and it went over AT's head, but AT, trying to use those hops, jumped up, and Diamichis was just waiting for it and would have pulled it down, but unfortunately unable to do that. And, you can't blame Alex Thomas for that unless he was called off by Diesel and didn't hear the call, because, coaches always say, if it's in the air, it's yours. And that's what he tried to do, but it didn't work out. Yet another mess up by the Thunderbirds. Max Shepard catches the pull in his own end zone, sends it to Van Dusen. Van Dusen wastes no time with time expiring in the quarter. This will float into the end zone, and Watt's underneath it. It goes up. Trimble has an opportunity to catch it as it floats over everybody else, bounces off of his hand. Yet another miscue for the Thunderbirds. Would have been an opportunity to bring this game to within 3 goals as time expired, but instead it falls into the hands of Nate Goff, and the Wildfire find themselves with a comfortable lead, 6-2, as we end the first quarter. So, as you can hear, it's a game in which the Thunderbirds just look like they're, a gear too slow. They can't quite match the pace of the Wildfire, and they can't quite match the skill. And this is probably not something that would have happened with a more experienced lineup, but these are growing pains. And I think that what these guys are showing by their ability to get open, to be in the right place at the right time, to make good decisions, is that the future for a lot of these players looks bright. But right now, in the intense pressure of the single-game format of the professional leagues against a team like Chicago, which has got a lot of experienced players, not just the big names this year, the pickups like Barker and Gibson, but Giannis, like Alex Rumelhart, who has been on this lineup for a long, long time. Since the days, I think, of Bob Lou and Goose Helton, A.J. Nelson, those guys are gone. Nick Zeman is an experienced player. Danny Miller, too, has done a lot of handling and cutting for these Wildfire, and so you simply can't make mistakes against these guys and expect not to pay for them. Against a team like the Mechanics, which has a similar sort of situation, a lot of developing players, you can't. Talked to Coach Adrian King of the Wildfire, and we asked him, how did you get Kurt to sign? I mean, Kurt Gibson is a guy who commuted for a number of years to play with the Dallas Roughnecks and won an AUDL title down there with Jimmy Mickle and Bo Kittredge. He has been a USA team member. He won a couple of national championships with Florida a little more than 10 years ago. And a well-traveled player with a great pedigree. He said, how was it that you got him to sign on the dotted line with the Wildfire? And he said this was a courtship that was going on for a number of years. We've been talking to him for about 3 years now, and said that, Kurt's been commuting, and this gives him an opportunity. He's living in the Chicagoland area and able to practice with his team. And that team's been working hard. We'll talk a little more about Dan Vacheroth and the conditioning program that Big Number 88 has instituted with his team. But I talked to him about him, and I'll tell you, you can't quite match the enthusiasm of a guy like Vacheroth, and he clearly knows what he's doing. Meanwhile, the Thunderbirds' offensive team is on the field right now. Sam Van Dusen has it on his goal line, sends it back to John Mast. John Mast being marked by Johansson. Handler's doing a little bit of a homie, and Van Dusen has to lay out on the sideline to bring this one in. So not a lot of easy cuts available. David Vatz running cuts in front of the disc with C.J. O'Brien on him. Two old-timers, I hope they don't mind me saying. And now Jimmy Toll's got it, shuffles up a little backhand to Mast, and Mast in a position to launch a huck. And this looks like it might be a mismatch, but Dave Vatz trying to use his body to gain positioning. And we get a call from Brian Heim. And it looks to me like right now, number 37, Drew Leverson, is trying to make his case for an integrity rule with Dave Vatz. He's saying, Dave, you were bumping me to try to hold position. And Vatz is saying, no. And Vatz is litigious. He's not going to lose this argument. If this is up to him to overturn, he doesn't think he's wrong. And, in fact, Vatz will take possession right near the goal line. So the Thunderbirds in the red zone, vertical stack in front of Vatz. Vatz has Mast behind him. He breaks the mark. But there is a call. Looks like there's contact on the mark. Vatz pleading his case. Looks like he pushed off a little bit. I don't know if that's a makeup call, but Trevor Bauer calls a push-off. So Dave Vatz outmatched in terms of height against 2 or 3 defenders there. And he positioned himself so that he drew a foul. Now he's got the disc. It's whistled in. He sends it safely back to Mast. And then he clears into a swing position. He's got it. He's got it right in the middle of the field, sends it over to Van Dusen. Cutting in front of him is Shepard. And now he sends a lefty hammer to Trucks Trimble at the back of the end zone. And Trimble anchors his foot. Wasn't sure how close he was to the end line. He was actually about 3 or 4 yards in. He pulls in Van Dusen's rifle of a hammer. And the Thunderbirds draw first blood in the second quarter. And that blood might be blood on the shin of Scott Trucks Trimble, who is a long-time Pittsburgh player. former Hampton standout, Hampton High School standout. He is a welder, and he is trying to build out of the wrought iron of this team, raw, trying to shape it into a contentious game here, a game that the Thunderbirds have a chance to win. I'm not sure that metaphor worked at all, folks, but hey, you don't hit if you don't swing. So Trucks Trimble pulling one down in the back of the end zone. And now Eddie Peters launches the pull, and it looks like D-team number 1 thundering down the field. Fridella and Peters come down to mark Giannis, and then behind him, got Barker. Goff has the disc. He sends a nifty one up to Gibson at midfield. Gibson finds Pardo. Pardo fakes the inside out, looks behind him. Giannis trying to do a little squirrely downfield cut, but instead Gibson ends up with it, now centers it to Giannis. Disc is right in the middle of the field, at midfield, and now Gibson working against Jada. Mo's giving him everything he can handle. He's kind of shutting Gibson down, but they have so many weapons. Johansson has it now, sends it back to Giannis. Giannis is safe haven for the disc almost all the time. He finds Goff, who sends it back to him. And then a layout bid by, I believe that must have been Diesel, right in front of Danny Miller, and the disc goes harmlessly through the end zone where Fridella will pick it up. And we'll see if maybe Pat Hammonds decides to use one of his timeouts. Fridella runs it up to the line, and it looks like he is going to put it in play. Finds Eddie Peters in the middle of the field. Giannis puts a mark on him. He throws an inside out across the field, and it looks like it's going to be beyond AT. And it does. It falls harmlessly for Kirk Gibson to pick it up with Mo matched up on him. He's flanked by Giannis. Vertical stack in front of them, anchored by Johansson in the front. And now, big in cut coming from Ross Barker. Instead, Giannis gets it, sends it across the field to Johansson. Goff at the front of the stack. Danny Miller cuts out of it, cuts into it. Now it's back into the middle in the hands of Johansson. Goff has the disc. Rasslin puts on the mark. Giannis has it. They're about 10 yards out, 5 yards out, and Kirk Gibson makes a cut in front of Giannis, beats Mo. It's a goal. 8:13 remaining in the second period. 7-3, favor of Chicago. Want to invite everybody to check out the Thunderbirds here up on the bluff at Art Rooney Stadium. It is a great entertainment value. We've got terrific ultimate in a beautiful location up here, looking out over the city behind me across the Monongahela River, and then in front of me we see the beautiful campus of Duquesne University. So you should come on out, park in the garage. If you'd like a workout, park down in that parking lot. Seems like it's open all the time. The gate arm is up, and then walk up those 200 steps. I know Dave Lionetti, assistant coach of the Thunderbirds, did that. Get a little workout in, come up here, have a hot dog from the concession stand, and we'll give you some upcoming dates real shortly. Also want to let you know that we will go back to video live streaming after this. This will be our last audio-only game, and got some exciting stuff to tell you about. We will in the second half. But for right now, Jonathan Mast finds Max Shepard. Shepard sends it to Ethan Beardsley, and he laces one up to Owen Watt. Watt quickly sends it to Max Shepard there on the far sideline. Shepard double-teamed and sends a hammer across the field to Jimmy Toll. They are into the attacking zone. Toll throws a little high-release forehand to Watt. Watt sends it to Beardsley. Beardsley catches it, and right in front of Brian Heim, gets that trailing left foot down in the end zone, and his right foot comes down almost pitter-patter at the same time, but he manages to keep that trailing foot down. And the Thunderbirds keep it within 3 with 7:42. A break would be very nice at this point. Almost essential. If the Thunderbirds want to make a move, I think that if they can finish this half down just a couple, it'll make a big difference. If the Wildfire can build on this lead, well, the Thunderbirds are going to have their work cut out for them in the second half. As I said, we would like to invite you to come out here onto the bluff, and want to give you some upcoming dates. First of all, make sure that you're here at 4 o'clock on May the 6th. May the 6th, we're going to welcome our always chippy, always feisty rivals, the Indianapolis Alley Cats, out here. And that's going to be might as well be a Mother's Day game, isn't it? We'll have to check that out. Maybe Mother's Day is the weekend following. Let's take a look at that. Looks like Mother's Day is the 13th, but you come on out, bring your mom. And Indy always gives the Thunderbirds a great game. And Thunderbirds right now in a zone against these Wildfire. Kirk Gibson working just behind that kind of attenuated line that is trying to force the Wildfire to swing the disc back and forth across the field. Better handlers for the Wildfire than for the Mechanics. We got Galini, Giannis playing catch, Johansson flanking them, Gibson coming in and out as the situation demands. And they're just a little flip pass there from Giannis to Galini. And in the front of that zone, looks like we've got May and I think Angeletti, Raslin jumping around in there. And just past midfield now, Giannis looking at his options. Meanwhile, in the back, we've got John Buss. Looking to see the rest of the personnel. Jordan Robarge is deep. And Wildfire being patient. Last week, Gibson. Oh! Looks like we might have a strip here. I think a strip is probably going to be called. We had a layout right in front of Danny Miller. And, Miller's going to pick the disc up, and he's going to walk it 10 yards towards the Thunderbirds' goal line there. Now just 5 yards out. And it was a nice bid. It's exactly what it was meant to be in this defense. And I didn't see who made the layout bid. But instead, he stripped the disc from Miller. Miller has it now. And Giannis gains a couple of yards on the jump cut. And then he sends it up to Johansson, throws him one with a little bit of zip, and he drops it in the end zone. And so now, perhaps the Thunderbirds, with 2 timeouts remaining, will think about whether or not they want to call a timeout. Looks like they're going to let the defensive team, D2, do a little bit of work. Pat McMullen sends it up to Mike Cicilline, to Ryan Cicilline. Ryan Cicilline throws up, missed that call a little bit. Didn't see who launched the huck, but it was a huck that fell errant to McMullen. And now McMullen scrambling to get back. Jordan Robarge trying to catch up with the disc, which is headed for Pardo. And Robarge bumps into Pardo, tracking that disc. And it looks like it's just going to be called a turnover. There's not going to be a call. I thought that contact, which was ruled incidental by the referee, might have resulted in the foul call. Instead, Robarge gets to pick up the disc. But he is called for a travel, and he's going to have to walk it back into his end zone. He slung it out to McMullen. So there was a huck sent down the field to McMullen, but McMullen didn't even see it go up, and now he throws a scoober to Robarge, who might get called for. Nope, now we've got a timeout. Raslan gathered the disc in on the Thunderbirds' goal line, and the Thunderbirds have the disc with 4 minutes and 40 seconds left in the quarter, and Coach Pat Hammond says, okay, now's the time to get my O team out, because this is a pretty critical point. So if you're looking for the video, folks, there's nothing much we can do about that until tomorrow, when we'll sync this up with the single camera that we've got working the game. But 4 to 7 right now. You can hear it on the radio 41.2, The Bird. I'm Matt Weiss, and bringing you this game old style. Some folks, I hope, here at the game, maybe you want to leave us a message. I've got that single earbud in. It's like they're listening to it on the transistor radio. I want to say hi to Tim Held. We appreciate you tuning in. Matt Park says, go Thunderbirds. We appreciate that. Anson says hi to me, and I appreciate that. And yes, it is Abraham Cruz, 7-4 Chicago. I'm going to get back to the AUDL app. Got an away game against these Wildfire after that Sunday, the 6th matchup, 6th of May matchup against the Alley Cats. Thunderbirds will be on the road against the Wildfire and then the Alley Cats, and they won't be back home till Minnesota visits us on the 19th. That's a 6 p.m. Saturday game. But now Jonathan Mast has taken over. He has the disc in his hands. He sends it into the middle of his end zone, where he finds Sam Van Dusen. Jimmy Toll stretching the defense deep, and Big Dan Vakarov, maybe among the shorter and taller players out here tonight. John Mast sends one over to Max Shepard, who's cutting across the field, and he is double-teamed. Rumelhart, one of those guys. Leverson, the other. And Mast pulls one down in traffic, sends it up to David Vatz. Vatz finds Watt. Running a fast break is Max Shepard, it looks like. And he sends one deep into the end zone to a sliding Ethan Beardsley. And the Birdman pops it up in front of Egan, catches it on his back. And Egan can only say, congratulations, big guy. That was a heck of a catch. So the offense does its job. And I am not sure who threw that one, but I suspect it was Sam Van Duzen.
Number 95, Sam Van Duzen.
Yep, it was. He threw a forehand downfield, and I might have miscalled it. Was on the far side of the field. So Sam Van Duzen in the power position, catching one on a give and go, and he sees Ethan cutting across that end zone diagonally towards the back corner, and he threw that lefty forehand to him, and Ethan had to slide to secure it. Didn't grab it right away. Might have been distracted a little bit by Egan laying out in front of him, but in the end, he maintained possession. The Thunderbirds' offensive team is huddling around David Vatz, who's like a coach on the field. Meanwhile, Eddie Peters sends up a pull. It's a bit of a low one. Comes down on the goal line. Galini centers it to Giannis while gaining about 20 yards. They're about 20 yards short of midfield, and Nate Goff almost gets it there. Cicilline with a mark on him. Eddie Peters working against Pavlianis. Giannis sends it across the field to Goff. And now Danny Miller on an in-cut. Secures it in front of, looks like that might be Jimmy Tull. Raslin on the mark. Giannis has possession. Sends it to Galini. Fridella going to seal that one off. Peters kind of clogging up the middle. And this was a strategy that the Thunderbirds discussed. Coach Hammonds talked with me about it. Oh, here's a throw into the corner of the end zone to Pardo, but it looks like we might have a push-off on the mark because there is a call from Brian Heim, and they're going to mark it back. So that would have been a goal to Pardo. Instead, they're just outside the red zone. Goff's got the disc. He finds Gibson. Gibson marked by AT. Now Giannis has it. He's been sure-handed all game. Gibson calls for it back. Giannis dances up, gains about 3 or 4 yards, centers it to Goff, about 15 yards outside the end zone. This one's up in the air. Galini, short man, goes up, catches it, thinks about throwing a forehand in the corner to, whoa, this one's popped up, and it bounces off the hands of a cross-cutting, looked like it might have been Goff. Not sure who dropped that one, but Thunderbirds have it with a chance to bring the score to within 1. Now, oh, geez. Unfortunately, that throw went from Fridella up to Cicilline, and he can't quite corral it. It was too high. Leapt up, got a hand on it, and Gibson takes possession of it, sends it out to Giannis. And boy, they'll look back on that one as a missed opportunity if they can't get a block. And we got Mo Giotta lying on the ground. He and Barker were cutting in the middle of the field, and he's pounding the ground. And it looks like he's hurt. Didn't quite see what happened. Looked like it was some sort of a collision. But Giotta's hurt. Yeah, that was really unfortunate because there was a bobble disc in the Wildfire attacking end zone. Thunderbirds picked up the disc. Kenny Fridella looking for Cicilline on the home sideline, and the pass just floated on him. And it's those little mistakes that make a big difference. And they're the difference in the game so far. Meanwhile, Mo is on his back. He is being attended to by the trainer, and all around the field, number of players down on one knee. It's a tradition that's developed in recent years for those of you who haven't played youth sports since back in the 70s and 80s like I did. We didn't do this back then. It's a nice tradition. When somebody's injured, everybody else gets down on one knee, and hopefully Mo will stand up real quick. And he's been working very hard. It's a good time to discuss the defensive strategy because he was part of it. I asked Pat Hammonds, and by the way, we'd like to say hi to Pat's folks, and Jim and Peggy, always faithful listeners to the stream. And we want to say hello to them back in Radnor. And Mo is hopping off the field right now, and that's unfortunate because he was doing a nice job against Gibson and Giannis. The plan Pat told me, was just to go flat against those guys, to try to do what's called shooter D, right, and just get in their way. Don't let them throw downfield, make other guys hurt you. And so far they have contained them, but part of that is because Mo and AT have been able to stay with them and keep them from getting the disc, particularly Gibson, when he has momentum and vision downfield and no mark, because he's always been close enough to get that mark and really make these guys work hard. Now Mo is apparently out of the game. He's not going to be able to play that role, and it's not clear who's going to be able to take over for him. Giannis slings it over to Gibson. Disc is in play, about 10 yards outside the goal line. And now this one ends up in the hands of Goff. Goff's going to look to dump it back to Giannis. He does. Cuts right between him and the mark. Giannis faking. He has a quick style, just constantly faking, moving that disc around. And with these big swooping fakes, moves the mark around. Disc has been dumped back a little bit, and this one is a low throw. Looks like Barker tried to send that one over to Galini. Or maybe to Gibson. In any case, it skipped. And now Van Dusen cranks up a hop. AT is underneath it with Barker. It's just those two guys. AT gains position. He looks for a call, but he's not going to get one. I think he got his hand on it first, and there was a little bit of contact. He held position pretty well as the disc, which was a backhand, a lefty backhand bender, kind of came across the front of his defender, who he was boxing out with his right shoulder, and Barker managed to make it uncomfortable enough for AT to be unable to corral it. Now on his goal line, marked by Ferdella, Giannis sends it out to an in-cutting Gibson, picks up about 10 yards, and Gibson launches one, and Raslin's underneath it with Pardo. Raslin got up before, but this time Pardo pulls it down right on the goal line, and he sends it into the hands of number 31, Danny Miller, and suddenly, well, the Thunderbirds might have cut that 1-1. They find themselves down 3 with 55 seconds left. I want to apologize to everybody. I haven't been keeping a close enough eye on the clock, and I know that I'm the only one who can tell you how much time is left. Let me tell you that we're inside a minute, and that was a big point. Thunderbirds had several opportunities to pull this game to within 1 point. And now it looks like the best that they can hope for is to use this minute to maybe, maybe they'll try to strike quickly and then pull it to within 1 on the next pull. But my guess is that they'll work the disc up the field patiently and hope that they can turn this into a score with time expiring and just try to keep it within 2. Let's see, Steve Wolf is listening from Philadelphia. Wolf, missed you at pickup today, and I know Fox Chapel misses you, so regards to you and hope that things are going well out there at school. This one is launched by Van Dusen. It's a lefty laser out to Trucks Trimble, who muffs it into the end zone. That one must have covered about 80 yards in the air, and it didn't take long getting there, and it didn't go very high. It was on a line, a frozen rope, as they call it, and Trucks and Sam Van Dusen meet at about the 25, and they do a flying chest bump or maybe a hip bump. Both of them come away with no injuries and come to the sideline to celebrate. And now D-Team number 2 takes the field, and they're probably going to come out in that zone and try to make Chicago hang on to it. 43 seconds left in the half. Thunderbirds are down. Chicago leads them 8-6. But that kind of quick strike capability is what Sam Van Dusen brings you. And it makes you think a little bit about Patrick Earls, because that lefty laser used to look like that from him. But as we enter the Sam Van Dusen era, increasingly, it doesn't remind you of Patrick Earls. It reminds you of Sam Van Dusen. Happy to see comments on the thread. Let us know how we're doing. Big pull goes up from John Buss. It floats down to Pavlianis, 5 yards outside his goal line. Sorry, Galini had it. Now Giannis has it, middle of the field. And Thunderbirds are in that zone. We've got May, Buss, Robarge, and looks like Angeletti in the middle. In the back, we got McMullen, Shepard, and all the way at the back, I bet that's Heffron. Can't quite see his number. He's being stretched back there with Pardo. Disc is right now, very quickly, in the hands of Barker in the red zone. And then this one is sent from Barker to a diving Galini, and with 9 seconds left, Chicago regains that three-point edge. So that zone was unable to prevent Chicago from moving the disc comfortably through the middle of it. They're better handlers, as I said, and there aren't too many better handlers in the AUDL than these Chicago Wildfire. I believe Gibson might have even taken that point off, and Giannis and Barker moved it just fine with each other. Haven't seen Max Trotter for a little while. He's been playing a handler on the D team, and these guys haven't had to play too far into their roster, still handling these Thunderbirds, and doesn't look like they're working too much harder than they'd like. Nick Zeman out there for this point. Dan Vakarov. Looks like Kurt Gibson's going to pull it up. Barker with him, right next to him. And then to receive it is the Thunderbirds offensive team. Max Shepard, Sam Van Duzen back, and obviously this one's going to be a punt. 9 seconds left. Van Duzen has it, and he might just throw it right from his position. He sends it up to Shepard. Shepard running it down with 3, 2, and a hammer is not going to make it into the end zone, and it is blocked.
And that's the end of the first half.
Blocked by Carl Kingma, but it hardly matters. With triple zeros on the clock, it is 9-6, favor of the Chicago Wildfire, as the Thunderbirds bring it in with each other and try to look for an answer. This game is not out of reach. It's not a blowout. But the Thunderbirds are going to have to find a solution. They're going to have to do it without their captain, Mark Fedorenko, inactive for tonight. They're going to have to do it without Mo Diarra, who is an instrumental part of their offense. And now halftime's about to start. We're undoubtedly going to have some mini discs flipped into the Huckett bucket, all sorts of fun stuff. But as for me, I'm going to take a little break and say so long to you. But don't worry, in just about 12, 13 minutes, look for us to put up another link to the stream. Yep, that halftime clock is rolling. It'll be 12 minutes, and I will be right back here with you, eager to bring you the second half from this game up here on the bluff between the Chicago Wildfire and the Thunderbirds. Chicago ahead, 9-6. Go ahead, get a snack. Talk to you soon. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is Matt Weiss at Art Rooney Stadium up on the bluff at Duquesne University. And we're ready for the second half of this AUDL Midwest Division game between the Chicago Wildfire and your Pittsburgh Thunderbirds. Right now, not as advantageous a position as the Thunderbirds had hoped for. Had a chance to make it 1 at the half, but the last minute went against them, and Chicago just received the pull up 6-9 as the clock is running. Giannis has it and guns it right away. I don't think Pardo can catch up to this, but I may be wrong. He did catch up to it. It was one of those weird throws where the thing looked like it was tracking at 100 miles an hour out the back of the end zone, and then a little bit of wind just popped it up. And that's going to happen at this stadium because all 4 corners are open. And as a consequence, there's swirling winds down there. When the wind gets to this gets to the end zone, it pops up. So Pardo was able to run underneath it. He's fast. Now we've got a Huck in the other direction. Rasland's underneath it. He gets some air, but Pardo and Giannis were around him, and he was unable to bring it down. So the Thunderbirds trading Hucks with the Wildfire to open things up. And with about 45 seconds gone and the clock running, we're still at 9-6. Now Rasland puts on an aggressive Marcus Ferdella. Mark Scalini out of a vertical stack. Johansson cutting at the front, and the disc is thrown on a break to him. Centers the disc, still in Chicago's defensive zone. Trucks Trimble marks up on Kurt Gibson, and with Mo Diarra out with what looks like it might be a hyperextended knee, it might be Trucks' job, but I bet it'll be by committee to defend Mr. Gibson. We've got a call from the back of the stack. Referee Brian Heim calls a pick. Gibson has the disc now, being marked by Trimble. He laces one up to Pardo, and there was a layout from Jimmy Toll. He comes up, little bump on the mark, but Barker has the disc now. Pat Mack on him. Strike cut up the line, and wisely pulling up was Eddie Peters as Giannis catches it in front of him. He laces it on the far sideline up to Kurt Gibson, who sends it back to Giannis. Giannis slings it into the middle. Pardo has it. just outside the red zone, and he sends one out in front of a diving Danny Miller. Tried to go trailing edge. It just wasn't a good enough throw, and Pat McMullen picks it up, sends it over to Ferdella. Ferdella finds Eddie Peters. Eddie Peters briefly double team, and now Barker settles on the mark on him. Now Trimble has the disc, and he is joined by a couple of guys, and he throws a scooper out of it, and McMullen Eddie Peters with a heroic layout saves the disc, and then gets it back to McMullen, who sends it backwards, or sends it downfield to Jimmy Toll, and then I don't know what Jimmy was thinking. I guess he was thinking that Ferdella was going to go deep. He didn't. Instead, Giannis picks it up, and at midfield, it ends up in the hands of Gibson. Gibson finds Danny Miller. Miller finds Barker, and it's all on that far sideline, all on that righty forehand sideline. Pat Mack on the mark. Ferdella trying desperately to keep Giannis from getting it, but he can't. Giannis gets the disc, and then throws a little up the liner to strike-cutting Barker. Barker gathers it in the end zone, the far pylon, and Chicago adds to that lead. We've got 9:16 left in this second period. This third period, this third quarter, second half, and Chicago takes a 10-6 lead. Dakota Diamicha says that we keep cutting out, and odd because usually with radio you can't ask your listeners for such personal communications, but Dakota, maybe you can clarify in your comment, you're not referring to the problem that we had when we just went off for about 10-12 minutes at the halftime. You're saying that our stream keeps being interrupted. If anybody else is having that problem, please put it in the comments for us. An offside is called on this poll, so a little bonus for the Thunderbirds with 9:16 left in this half. John Mass runs it up to midfield, and he gets to put it in play. Max Shepard cutting away from him, and instead it's sent out to Sam Van Duzen. Shepard cutting in front of him, and Van Duzen sends it backwards to Mast. Goff marking Van Duzen. And number 7, Dave Woods, is playing defense in the handlers. They're kind of trading off and back and forth to each other, Goff and Woods. They're kind of doing a roll with the handler sort of thing. And the handlers are Mast and Van Duzen. They've had to move the disc backwards. They're now back at midfield where they started. A bender thrown to Max Shepard, and Nick Zeman lays out in front of him, but he pulls it in anyway, and then he sends it all the way across the field, and Max meant for that to bend back in bounds. I can't see his target. I think it's Raslan. It's all the way across the field. No, it was Jimmy Toll, and instead it flies over the front corner pylon, and Max Trotter picks it up, so it never bent. That bender never bit. And now LeMaitre has it, and we've got the D team, Chicago, playing offense. Trotter, LeMaitre, and Woods playing catch back there, and now Goff has it on an in-cut. They get it up to near midfield. Kingma has it, shuffles it up to Zeman. Zeman catches it, and now sends it into the middle of the Trotter as the Thunderbirds look to be trying to catch up. Now a vertical stack. It's sent to Zeman off the top of that stack. Jimmy Toll marking him, harassing him. Zeman shuffles it to Trotter right in front of him. They're about 20 yards out, so they're almost in the red zone. Sends it back about 5 yards into the middle. Woods sends it over to LeMaitre, and it bounces. It leads him by just a little bit too much on the swing. Bounces off his hand, and now the Thunderbirds have the opportunity. Their offense manages to get a D, and the offense is going to pick it up, Jonathan Mast. And he's got Dave Vatz cutting in front of him. The human backwards hat carousing on the sideline. And then Max Shepard cuts back. Jonathan Mast trying to get open in front of him, and instead Vatz sends an inside out in the middle, hoping to find Beardsley, and instead this falls to the turf, and it's thrown. Chicago picks it up and leads Jack Shea into the end zone in front of Beardsley. So a fast break off of that David Vatz turnover, and suddenly Chicago extends their lead, their halftime lead of 3 to 5. It's 11-6, and 7 minutes remain in the third period. So Pittsburgh unable to clean it up. Dave Vatz was kind of stuck on that sideline. In the AUDL, the count is so quick. It's 7, and you can't hear the count because the referee is signaling it with his arm behind you. If you're used to playing Ultimate in any other setting, you got somebody in front of you and he's counting to 10. He's counting out loud. And while he might be counting fast as we get to the higher levels of the game, though I'm going to tell you that my stall count, timed many times on my digital watch, my stopwatch, is always between 9.5 and 10 seconds. So I don't like the automatic fast count. But be that as it may, at least you can hear the sucker. This is a 7-second count that you can't hear. That pull was crazy. It looked like it was going to go out of bounds. It helixed a couple times, and it landed just inside the line. Disc is sent across the field by Eddie Peters. It's gathered in by Adnan Raslan. And he finds Sam Van Dusen at midfield close to the Thunderbirds sideline. And that is that righty forehand sideline. He's being marked closely by Rumelhart. He throws one across field, a big high swing all the way across the field just inside the hash mark. Eddie Peters catches it. It's right at the 50, and Eddie launches a backhand, and it looks like it's going to go over the head of the defense, and it's gathered in by, that looks to me like Jimmy Toll, and he does a flip. So Eddie Peters saw the opportunity to throw an NFL-style fade pattern, and he launched that up over the defense, and it came down. And there were two receivers underneath it who could have pulled it in, but it looks like, I think it was Diesel. I miscalled that because I said it was Jimmy Toll, because Diesel keeps changing shirts on me. So far this year he has worn number 55, Fedorenko's number 7, and now he's wearing number nothing. He has no number on his shirt. But it's easy to see him when he does that flip in the end zone. One of the fittest and most intense of the Thunderbirds, and he just did a little celebratory flip. But with 6:30, he hasn't had much to flip about. 6:30 left in the third quarter, and Chicago leads 11-7. Disc is a low pull, comes down to Galini, who centers it to Gibson. Gibson in the middle of his attacking half of the field. Thinks better about sending it across the field, and the Thunderbirds in that zone that has not really slowed down this wildfire crew. Gibson and Giannis and Galini playing catch with it. Behind it is Danny Miller. Over here by us is Johansson. Running deep is Pardo. And the Thunderbirds personnel in the front, one shot right up between the defenders by Galini, and it's bobbled by Miller, but Miller sends it back he catches it, sends it back, and eventually ends in the hands of Kirk Gibson in the red zone right now. Giannis has it in the middle of the field, the zone in front of him. Trucks Trimble on that far side wing. John Buss is deep, and it looks like May sealing things off on this side. Trimble and Buss, kind of both of them, playing the deep, and instead the Wildfire just send one from Giannis right up the gut to Barker. And without much trouble from the zone, maybe one kind of scary moment for them where there was a bobbled pass to Danny Miller. The Wildfire just shred that zone, and it's 12-7. 5:30 left in the half.
Ask about $15 jerseys for your next team order through discstore.com.
Report from the Thunderbirds trainer, Anthony Mobile. He attended not just to Mo Diarra, who has an ice bag on his knee. We didn't get an official report from him. But he was also ministering to Kurt Gibson, wrapping up his left thumb. And I asked Kurt about it. He said he couldn't tell. He laid out and he jammed it, twisted it, bumped it, but it was hurting him a little bit. And not on his throwing hand. I told him I don't think he should throw any lefty thumbers, and he said he'd take that one out of the toolbox for tonight. John Mast receives a pass off the pull from Sam Van Dusen, who gets it back from him. Over on his lefty forehand side, he sends one up to Watt. Watt pulls it in right in front of Goff, and then he laces an inside out. David Vatz trying to track it down, and he looked like he might launch, but it just got there a little bit too quick for him. You know, Dave Vatz is, he's been in this league from the beginning for the Thunderbirds, and he's definitely one of the more venerable players on this team. He's in his 30s and into his mid-30s. And so, you know, Dave's a fast guy. He probably would have caught up with that maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, but not that time. Not slow by any means, but couldn't quite catch up with it. Meanwhile, LeMaitre, from midfield, launches a floater, and Jack Shea and Zeman are underneath it, but you know what? So's Jimmy Toll, and he says, I'll take that. Jumps up, skies both those big boys, and now the disc finds its way into Van Duzen's hands again. Van Duzen sends a nice backhand up to Max Shepard, who is utterly unmarked, looks up saying, somebody go deep for me, that's what I want. He skips Van Duzen on the swing and sends it all the way across the field to Mast, and now it's in Watt's hands on the far sideline. So Thunderbirds working it back and forth across the field, and Jimmy Toll is open deep. Nick Zeman gives him some space, and it's a lefty floater. Zeman underneath it, but Toll pulls this one down too. Nick Zeman says, congratulations. What else can you say? Van Duzen had Toll streaking deep, but it took a little while for him to see the cut. He threw it up, and you could tell from his reaction that he wasn't totally happy with the throw, and he had good reason not to be. It hung a little bit, but Jimmy Toll maintained his position. Both he and Nick Zeman went up for the catch at the same time, and just like he did on defense in front of Zeman, he posterizes him again. So bookends for both those fellas, the good kind for Jimmy and the bad kind for Zeman. Thunderbirds with 4:06 left in the third quarter trail 12-8. Hey, thanks a lot to Dakota Demichis. She is listening. I think you're in Texas, isn't that right, Dakota? And she tells us our stream is coming through loud and clear now, so I'm glad that's worked out. And she tells us we shouldn't be surprised by her brother John's wardrobe changes. He likes to keep us on our toes, and that's what he's doing. Meanwhile, Kurt Gibson has the disc off of the pole. He sends it over to Miller, and Miller centers it. Pardo throws one up. There are two defenders underneath it. Now three. Raslin is underneath it. Giannis was underneath it, and it was either AT or Raslin who jumped up and got the block in the end zone. And now defense takes over on offense. Raslin has it. He has a couple choices. Eddie Peters on an in-cut. He's got it 10 yards outside of his goal line. He sends it across the field to McMullen. Mack continues it in the direction of Kenny Ferdella. Kenny Ferdella sees McMullen and swings it back to him. He can send it over Eddie Peters, and he does. AT downfield, and then he starts to cut deep, and filling in that space underneath is Trucks Trimble on the sideline. He throws a nifty forehand to AT in front of a diving Giannis. That guy has got a lot of spring in his legs, does Giannis. Now McMullen throws a high release that Ferdella pulls down in front of a diving defender. Looks like Galini. Now the defensive team continues to swing it. Eddie Peters in the attacking zone. And now in the red zone, Giannis has it. Double clutches on a backhand, throws it up to Ferdella at the goal line, and he has AT. He was double teamed, and he should have thrown a hammer or a scuba. That was the perfect opportunity for an overhead. AT was alone. Instead, he threw a backhand, which fell to the turf. And now, Makalakalad. And he throws a right hand. I'm just going to call him Bruno because that's what he said to do. And I'm going to call him a thrower because he just jacked a 70-yard forehand to Barker. And he has it on the doorstep. He was joined by Miller. And not much to do about this. This is a jailbreak. But there's a quick double team on Bruno. And he manages to get through it. And he throws an iffy pass up to Miller. But Miller gathers it in. And you see the frustration on Ferdella. He slams his legs twice now, slams his palms against his thighs in frustration. He had an opportunity to cut the Chicago lead to 3. That would have made it 12-9. And, the offense against, give the Wildfire credit. These guys are playing all out, selling out on defense. We had Galini and Giannis laying out in front of those receivers for marginal block opportunities, but ones where they certainly could have distracted these receivers. And then these guys have been running hard on offense all night. Nobody would have blamed them if they hadn't laid out for those. They did. And the Thunderbirds made those catches right behind those layouts. And then Ferdella had it on the goal line, and, he wishes he could have that throw back. Either pop a scuba over the top to AT or pull it back down and keep working. But it's sort of a D-team mentality. You have the opportunity to score, and you want to strike. It was just that the Thunderbirds don't have a lot of mistakes to give away. John Mast has the disc right now in front of a vertical stack, and he breaks to Dave Vatz off the top. Max Shepard sends one out. Diesel is closing on it. Goff lays out right next to Diesel, and Diesel congratulates him. It was a nice throw by Max Shepard, and it was coming down in the back corner, on the righty forehand back corner of the end zone, and Goff lays out in front of of Diesel and pops it over the little screen back there into a little stairwell, and Goff climbs over it and retrieves the disc, puts it in play, sends it into the middle of the field, and now Vacheroth has it on the swing. Romo Hart cutting in front of him, a strike cut guarded closely by Vats, who lays out. They both go down. Romo Hart catches it, and now the disc finds itself in, it's getting a little dark, hard to see. C.J. O'Brien has it now at midfield, marked by Owen Watt. CJ sends one up to Goff, who tracks it down just on the doorstep. He has to fall to catch it. Van Duzen has the mark. He throws up a little bit of a hook shot there to O'Brien, who was, no, I'm sorry, it wasn't O'Brien. It looks like he was Egan, cutting on to the right of him. So if you can picture this, he's got the disc on the goal line, and to his right, he's got Egan cutting, and he just throws up a little bit of a kind of a push pass, somewhere between a Tad Whistle skyhook and a push pass to his right to a guy cutting up to him, and throws it in front of him, and the disc is caught for a goal. And with 1:05 left in this quarter, it's not an overstatement to say that the game's getting a little bit out of hand. Chicago practically doubling the Thunderbirds' total, 14-8. As you see these Thunderbirds coming off the field, they've got their hands on their heads. They're still running hard. That's thanks in part to the work of Donald Robinson from Global Human Performance. That's his personal coaching, physical training company. And Donald is putting me through my paces. Disc is in the hands right now of Scott Trucks Trimble at midfield, and he fakes a big backhand. AT cuts in towards him, gathers it in front of Lemater, and he sends it right back to Trucks, who slings it into the middle to John Buss. John Buss, flanked by Eddie Peters and Trucks, and he sends up a little high release to a strike-cutting Trucks. He throws up an inside out to Pat Mack. It gets blocked by Max Trotter, and Pat gets the rebound, and then Trotter blocks his high release, which, to be fair for Pat Mack, he isn't all that high. But neither is Max Trotter. He's not a big guy, and he knocks that out of the air. So Pat Mack gets a rebound, and then his disc is blocked. He's putting on a heavy mark on Max Trotter, a little bit too heavy, it seems, because it looks like we might have a contact foul on the mark. Getting instructions from Brian Heim in the back of the end zone. No yardage changing hands, so it's hard to see. Chicago calls a timeout. I wish I could tell you exactly what the call was there. Brian Heim blew the whistle, and I expected that it was going to be a foul on Pat Mack, and it would have been understandable if McMullen had maybe been a little too close on that mark, because it was so frustrating. He made such a great catch. What happened was, disc thrown up to him, Trotter lays out in front of him, and the disc deflects and is falling towards the ground. And as Pat is falling, he reaches out with his right hand and he snatches it off the ground just before it hits the turf. Then he stands up, and he had a strike cutter going for the corner of the end zone right in front of him, and tries to throw out that righty backhand high release, and Max Trotter got his hand on it. So very frustrating. Chicago uses its first timeout. We've got 29 seconds left in the quarter. It's 14-8. Favor of the Wildfire. And true as advertised, Wildfire in their first game this year, a little bit of rust, some drops that we probably don't expect to see from them later in the season, though they did lead the AUDL in drops last year with, I think, 77 or something like that. That was uncharacteristic, and they've got some very sure-handed players they've added to their roster. But aside from that, folks, it looks like the Wildfire are better than they was. Hope the stream is coming in loud and clear for you. My former Summer League captain, Kelsey Cowles, listening to this stream. And I'd like to say hi to her and hi to everybody. Hope if you're listening in Chicago, you're enjoying hearing this radio-style broadcast of your team in its first game of the season with big expectations. And, wow, a near collision there, because Barker slung one up the field to an in-cutting Pavlianis, but there was all sorts of traffic, and the Thunderbirds get a block. AT has the disc now, and the disc is just entering the red zone. It's in the hands of Jimmy Tull, Pat McMullen behind him, Eddie Peters in a crowd in front of him, and a whistle is blown. And a timeout was called on this turnover. So with 3 seconds left in the quarter, Pat Hammonds saw an opportunity to get his offensive team on the field. Hey, Joe Hammonds, let me say I apologize to you. After all these years, you wouldn't think I'd call you Jim Hammonds, but if Jim Hammonds is listening too, hi to you, pal. But I meant to say hi to Joe and Peggy Hammonds, and just to let you know that Pat's doing a great job in this new role. I talked to Pat about why he's not playing because, you know, Pat is a longtime Pittsburgh standout player, and he was a big part of the Thunderbirds' offense and defense in past years. But Pat hurt his shoulder on a layout late in the season last year, and he says it's just not ready. He said the shoulder is fine. It feels good. It's 100%. He can do everything that he needs to with it. But his conditioning isn't there. And he said, you know, a couple of years ago I came back from an injury and I wasn't in condition and I didn't feel good. And then last year I worked hard in the off season and I felt great up until I hurt myself. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that again and not play my best. So he's stepping into this role, and it's a challenge. You know, he doesn't have some of the superstar players that he's had in the past, but these guys are going to learn a lot from Pat. Speaking of people who are going to learn a lot from Pat, Pat and his wife are expecting. He was talking to me about that. That's really exciting. And another Thunderbird who is expecting is Eddie Peters and his wife, Kara. So, Kara, you're due in about 4 weeks. I don't know if you're out here tonight. If you're listening on the radio, 41.2, you're about to hear a goal. Owen Watt, a blade thrown up. And it looks like that came from John Mast to Owen Watt. And Thunderbirds with the time expiring in the quarter. The Thunderbirds bring it to within 5. It's 14-9. So, yeah, just about 4 weeks, the new head coach of Pittsburgh women's club team, Hot Metal, Eddie Peters, and his wife, Kara, are expecting a little baby. So we couldn't be more thrilled for Pat and his wife and Eddie and his wife and, you know, the expectant grandparents. It's a wonderful time of life, a busy time of life with my own kids going off to college next year, my oldest, and my youngest one coming to high school with me at Shadyside Academy where I teach and coach. I know it's a long journey, but this is how it starts, and it's always exciting. So our love to both of those families and our best wishes to them, too. We've got the Huck It Bucket challenge right now, and all of these mini discs flying out of the stands. A couple of them have come close, but so far, oh boy, that one just about lipped it. We saw one that had a chance, but we might not. Oh, in and out. And I got to tell you, folks, if you have an opportunity to come down to the stadium, one of the treats that you just can't get listening to the radio, 41.2 The Bird, or even watching our live stream or the broadcast games we've got coming up, our stream on Ultiworld, you just can't get the fun of my buddy and partner, Naked Bill Holman, out there in his trademark blazer and yellow bandana, running the festivities out here. He is your MC, your host, and he's just always got something up his sleeve. And he's great with the kids, he's great with the grown-ups, and you just can't help but smile. Even last week when it was 30 degrees and windy out here, the fans were enjoying the antics of Bill Holman's. Come on out. Wanted to give you a heads up, too, on something that is just wonderful, that we are really looking forward to, and actually it's it's a double whammy for you. First, on Saturday the 2nd of June, right here up on the bluff, we're going to be having a cross-coast game against the DC Breeze, and I believe that we might have ESPN3 in here doing that because it's a cross-coast challenge, or maybe Ultiworld is going to do that game. Can't be sure. So DC, a team that's always a threat in the East, is going to be coming here to match up against your Thunderbirds. But the other part of this, and I just am so excited about this, is the very next day, Sunday, probably around 4 o'clock. We'll get you the time definitively. The Thunderbirds and the Breeze are participating in something a lot of AUDL teams are doing, and I'm going to tell you at the next break what it is. But right now, Thunderbirds take the opening pull of the fourth quarter, and Jimmy Toll sends it up to Owen Watt, who sends it back to him, centers it. Thunderbirds pushing the edge of their attacking zone. Jonathan Mast has it now. Drew Leverson marking him. And And Bruno sets up on Jimmy Toll. Jimmy breaks to get it back to John Mast. And downfield, Sam Van Dusen on an in-cut catches it in front of Goff, and then he sends one out into space. It's an inside-out backhand air bounce, but it just didn't bounce enough for Max Shepard. And so, with 30 seconds gone in the fourth period and final period, Thunderbirds trailing 14-9. A missed opportunity there. Van Dusen couldn't quite connect with Shepard. And now, Barker sends it to Goff, both of them off-season acquisitions. Goff from Raleigh, and Barker coming from Madison. And now Egan corrals it. And so some of that is the second offensive team. And a diving block there. And it looks like it came from Owen Watt. And so picking it up in the attacking zone on the far sideline is John Mast. He finds Van Dusen. Van Dusen looking menacing with that lefty forehand, but instead he sends it back to John Mast, who throws a backhand and is probably going to get called for a travel here.
Travel on the throw. Penalty, Thunderbirds.
You know, probably not a travel on the throw. That was the call here in the booth, but I'm confused because John Mast would have had the disc back. Instead, David Batch sends it back to him, and the Thunderbirds are now out of the opposing attacking zone, and Van Dusen has it, and Leverson marking him. And Van Dusen, as he so often does, decides to launch it, and he's got Owen Watt running underneath it. Nope, I'm wrong on the call, and I should have been right because I've seen it before. In his 44th consecutive AUDL regular season game, with painkillers coursing through his bloodstream, lighter by 2 wisdom teeth, Ian Beardsley used that weight that he dropped in the form of those teeth. Maybe it's even 4. I couldn't tell for sure when I talked to him. But he was speaking clearly and was happy to be here, and he pulls in a goal. So with 10 minutes and 5 seconds remaining in the game, the T-Birds get an important goal to cut the Chicago lead to 14-10. So let me tell you what's happening that weekend. On the 3rd, Sunday the 3rd, both the Breeze and the Thunderbirds and several other AUDL teams have tried out and rostered a supercell team of women ultimate players who will join a number of the Thunderbirds in a mixed roster game. This will not count in the AUDL standings, and now we've got Gibson with the disc looking at Giannis working downfield, and he's going to get him on a comeback cut. And then he sends it up to Barker. And, Coach Adrian King told us that Gibson would be playing that role, and now he sends out a helixing hammer to Mike Pardo, and it is perfecto and falls into his hands in the end zone. So just as quickly as the Thunderbirds cut that lead to 4, it's back up to 5, 15-10. So I know Detroit has a women's team this year. Not every AUDL team does, and these games are not going to count on the AUDL standings, but that's not to say that such games won't count in the future, or that we might not see a dramatic change in the AUDL. I'm not announcing any secrets here. I'm not letting slip any secrets. That there's a lot of controversy around this right now, and I like to believe that, particularly in such a polarized time, this is one of those situations where reasonable minds really can disagree. There are a number of high-profile players and coaches and other folks who have decided to boycott the AUDL this year because they don't like the lack of progress for gender equity. They want Pro Ultimate to be mixed, and I happen to share in that desire. There are some folks who feel that way, who are staying in the AUDL, believing that it probably won't result in the Pro League adding women. It might result in the end of the Pro League, and that wouldn't be a good thing. Sam Van Dusen up to Ethan Beardsley at midfield, who sends it back to John Mast. Now Max Shepard has it. He almost goes down on one knee to send a forehand up to Dave Batch, who's on the goal line, and he's got Ethan Beardsley again, or is that Watt? I think it's Watt, cutting right up next to him, and he just slings it up to him. So very quick movement by the Thunderbirds. They have to score quickly, and they do. 9:20 left, 15-11, the Thunderbirds. So some of the folks in the AUDL who thought about this, gave it a lot of thought, so they wanted to see some progress, and these Supercell games are, in the eyes of many folks, a sign of the AUDL's good faith to try to get women playing games, and we will be streaming that live. We will have full coverage. We're going to have Steel Toe Productions out there, and we'll have all the camera angles, on the field interviews, after game interviews, and we'll be bringing you that game, and you'll get to see some of the stars of Pittsburgh Women's Ultimate from Washington and from Pittsburgh, and I'm really looking forward to that, and I can only hope that every AUDL team is going to add a Supercell team in the coming year, and that at some time in the not-too-distant future, as a long pull settles down out of bounds with the score 15-11, 9-20, 15-11 Chicago lead, going to take it at the brick mark, I would like to see in the future at least some, if not all, of these games to be mixed, because I think that that's something Ultimate brings to the world of sports that no other sport does, and that is men and women on the same field, no net between them, no barrier, playing together. And we've seen it work at the World Games. We've seen it work at Nationals and at Worlds. And here Kirk Gibson finds an open behind the zone, Danny Miller. And as the wind dies down, and we can see the flags very quiescent now, that zone will be even more porous. The lights are on. Galini sends it across the field to Johansson. Johansson plays catch with him, and now Giannis stands directly at the big red and blue D for Duquesne. And Kirk Gibson picks up 5 yards on a little cut, throws that hammer, and everybody jumps a little bit. Instead, he just throws it to his buddy, and these guys are just like standing around at the party right now, just throwing it to each other. Almost picture a beer in their hands. Galini is running. He can't hold a beer, and he sends it into the middle. Gibson, Giannis in the red zone, sends one in front of a diving Thunderbirds defender, and it's gathered in by Barker in the end zone. Maybe that's Miller, in fact, and I think it was Robarge who made the bid, but it wasn't enough. 8:36 remaining. Thunderbirds trail 16-11. So if you want to see Mixed Gender Ultimate from two AUDL teams and their women's teams who are partnering with them this year, please come out, and we'll get you the exact time. It will be on Sunday afternoon, and it will be at Founders Field, which was the Thunderbirds' home a couple of years ago. It was the best field in the AUDL. All grass, best field in the Midwest Division. And although it wasn't 100% great for spectators, who had a long drive, and it wasn't 100% great for kids, coming out there, and the games were late at night. Pull goes out the back of the end zone. Thunderbirds will take it at the brick mark. It was a really terrific venue. So, do make that drive out there. It's not that far from Pittsburgh. You'll be able to have a beer, set up your barbecue grill. We'll do a little tailgating and come see Supercell play. DC Breeze and the Pittsburgh Thunderbirds, and male and female standouts from both cities playing in a game that, probably will be played with rules a little different from the typical AUDL. We don't have to have referees if we don't want to, and probably that game will be played with observers or maybe just pure self-officiating. Sam Van Dusen sends one up to Owen Watt, who's getting more and more involved in the offense. Now David Vatz is double teamed. He throws up a hammer, and Drew Leverson nearly steals it away from Sam Van Dusen, but he looks it into his hands and now sends it across the field to Jimmy Toll at midfield. We have a call downfield. I heard a whistle, and now here's another whistle as Max Shepard gathers it in, and they want to know what's going on. Looks like it might be a pick, and that's what Brian Heim calls.
Pick call on the field.
8 minutes left, 16-11 Chicago. Brian Heim has a reputation for being willing to call picks. Pittsburgh officiating crew often does. Hey, Jimmy Sikora, longtime Wildfire player, and he says, "Go Chicago." He's listening in. Jimmy, great to hear you out there, and hope you're enjoying this audio broadcast of the game, listening to your team on the radio. Now, just to the other side of midfield in the attacking zone. Now Max Shepard has it about 20 yards out on the edge of the red zone. Fakes a big hammer and instead pulls it down, slings it over to Van Dusen, who sends one out to him, a floating backhand air bounce, and he has it right on the doorstep. And he throws a hammer across field, helixing, trying to catch up with it is Watt, who wide receiver style, like the old Hines Ward, or maybe Antonio Brown, reaches up there, gets both his mitts on it, goes down, controls the catch to the ground, doesn't bounce out, and with 7:12 left, Thunderbirds keep on the outer edge of striking distance, but still there, 16-12.
Owen Watt.
Turn down. What? Thank you for clarifying.
Ryan Orland got a mention from you talking about the boycott, and I know that it's not the most popular subject in the AUDL. Ryan says it's important to bring it up, and I think it is too. If I get a stern talking to, I'll take my lumps, and if I get docked my salary for the game, we'll donate that to GUM, Girls Ultimate Movement. As the father of a lefty handler who's going to be going to college next year, Maya, it turns out, does not support the boycott, and I respect that. I also respect Kurt Gibson's forehand huck to Ross Barker. He gathers it in. Pardo runs by him. He's being defended by Raslan, and he jukes him. He has to catch up with him now. Now Danny Miller has it. He throws up a weird sort of dipsy-doodle backhand blade, but Barker catches it in front of AT, and with 6:51 left, it's 17-12. Yeah, I mean, as I was saying, there's a range of opinions, and again, reasonable people can disagree. My daughter is a 17-year-old Ultimate player. Happy to be playing in the Pittsburgh Adult Spring League this year. Has led her high school team to a 2-0 record so far. Some very sloppy up-win, downwind games with a lot of punt and play D. And I know that she feels strongly about the opportunity to play, but she also is an AUDL fan, and so her personal sentiment is not with the boycott, but she respects where it's coming from, and so do I. And I think that Andrew Gardner, the GM of the Thunderbirds, is really committed to making this a meaningful effort on the part of the league, and we'll see what happens. But we're talking about it, and that's a good thing. And soon I'm really eager to see those players. Back to the game at hand. Shepard under the lights now from Van Duzen, just outside their own goal line. Mast has it now. Looks off and in-cutting Watt. It's really nice to see Watt getting into the game. And Van Duzen sends Watt. Boy, this is a mighty huck. And running underneath it is Jimmy Tull. Wow, what a catch he makes. Trailing him the whole time and gaining on him was Raleigh's former standout, Nate Goff, a shutdown defender. Sam Van Duzen saw Jimmy, and he didn't hesitate to pull the trigger. And that one, wow, it had a lot of heat on it, and it had a lot of air underneath it. And as it fell in front of Toll, you could tell that Goff was going to make it a contest, and he did. He jumped up, but Jimmy does not seem intimidated. And I'll make a comparison now that anytime you make this comparison to an Ultimate player of my generation, you're probably a little out of line. But I'll say that the way that he goes up for those discs that are over his head when he's in a forest of tall trees, like he has been a couple times, and comes down with it, reminds me of none other than the Hall of Famer, New York great, and possibly greatest player ever to play the game, Kenny Dobbins. Now, Jimmy Toll's got a long way to go before he's Kenny Dobbins, but he reminds me of him in that respect, and that is high praise, I'll tell you that. So, 6:15 left, 17-13 Chicago. Thunderbirds in a tight man D. Robar settles in on Galini. Now it's in the hands of Johansson at midfield. He throws a righty backhand and finds Gibson in the commanding position. And then Gibson slings the disc over and gets it back. Gibson just playing distributor here. And throwing passes so quickly I can't keep up with them. And the Wildfire notch another goal. And if you think that the Wildfire are going to get out of their game at this point, slow things down and try to drain time off the clock, I don't think they feel that there's any reason to. Their offensive line seems to be pretty fresh, and I think they feel like the longer they make those points last, the more opportunity they have of giving one to the Thunderbirds on a botched exchange or a little floater that catches some wind. We can see the flags now across the field, and they're a little more lively than they were. Wind blowing out of the west, down the Ohio River to the east, towards Philadelphia, where the Pittsburgh Penguins series will move, tied at 1-1 after the two teams traded blowouts. And not so many blows yet, but I'm sure that'll come, given those two teams. Here comes the pull. It's a big one. It's high. It's coming down. on the far side of the field, and it lands in bounds in the end zone, and Trucks Trimble picks it up, or maybe that's Max Shepard. At this point, it's dark. Trucks Trimble picking it up in that position would be surprising. So let's say it's Max, and you can tell by those bright orange cleats and that deceptively slight build. Max is a strong guy. Here comes Ethan Beardsley catching a big swing near our sideline, and he's probably going to throw it backwards. He does. Seen make a downfield throw earlier this season, last week, and we're kind of surprised. We're not surprised by Sam Van Dusen launching this huck. Again, Jimmy Toll underneath it, Bruno with him, and Jimmy mistimes the jump. Soon as company, disc goes over his head, and Jimmy's in great shape. Again, Donald Robinson working with these guys, doing a lot of plyos. Both these guys have terrific fitness coaches. In the case of the Wildfire, it's one of their players. That's Dan Vacheroth. And I'll tell you, he has these guys on a year-round program, and he detailed it to me. Now the Wildfire throwing it back into their own end zone. Egan gathers it in. And, he says, whoa, O'Brien and Bruno collide over there. And O'Brien briefly loses a handle on the disc, but catches it. And lucky there were no injuries here. And, here comes C.J. O'Brien underneath this disc. Beardsley running with them, but C.J. pulls it down. And he's got Rummelhart cutting to the end zone. Pursuing him is Shepard, and Rummelhart jumps up and gets it just before Shepard can pull it down. And so with 4:32 left, Chicago may be putting things out of reach, 19-13. And CJ and Bruno, lucky that they didn't hurt each other there or hurt themselves. And, while I'm at it, I wanted to say hi to some special friends. The O'Brien family is in town. Maureen O'Brien, who is CJ's mom. CJ, a longtime player for these Wildfire, and her husband Dan. And CJ's little sister Lizzie is here, along with their friend Larry. I can't tell if Larry's a relative. He might be. Maureen's brother. They're from Montour. She grew up in Robinson Township. And a couple of years ago, when Chicago played the T-Birds on Mother's Day, we were sending out Mother's Day wishes to the players' moms. And Maureen at the time was battling cancer and was undergoing her treatments. And she let us know through CJ how much she appreciated that greeting. And tonight we were able to see her, thank goodness, in good health. And happy to be here. And we're happy she's here. Chicago travels well. They're a little loud in the stands tonight. Meanwhile, Thunderbirds have the disc in Wildfire territory, and Trimble sends a rifle up to AT in the end zone. So, Thunderbirds convert quickly, and Pat Hammond says, get on, get on, get off, get off. And here comes D team number 2. Actually, it looks like we're going to have a little bit of a mixing of personnel, because Jimmy Toll is coming out on the field to play defense. We're going to see if AT can stay out there. He can. Dakota's brother, John Diamichis. Diesel is out there. Pat Mack. Max Shepard is also going to come out here. So we've got 2 of the Thunderbirds' offensive studs. Superstars of the team can be said to have one. Max Shepard and Jimmy Toll are going to come out here to play some defense, and unless I miss my guess, that disc is in the left hand of Sam Van Dusen. So the Thunderbirds, one last-ditch shot at a comeback. Van Dusen launches a pole high into the Duquesne University night sky, and it comes down about 5 yards deep in the end zone, and then settling on the mark is Alex Thomas. Disc is in the hands of Kurt Gibson, not taking any chances, keeping their regular line in, and Gibson streaking across the front of the formation, and AT following him. He gets it back. Pavlianis weaving around, trying to roll with the mark is AT, but staying with it is Shepard. And now AT marked up on Gibson. It's in the hands of Galino. Sorry about that, Mr. Galino. Barker has it now at midfield. Thunderbirds playing tough defense. Wildfire being patient. Why shouldn't they? 3:38 remaining. 19-14 lead for Chicago. Giannis gained some yards with this one to Pardo. Pardo's got the disc, sends it back to Giannis. They're just inside midfield and don't look like they're in a hurry at this point. But Barker, he looks off Goff downfield, so maybe he's not in a hurry. Instead, exchanges passes with Gibson, and this might be a strip call. Jimmy Toll lays out in front of Pardo, and it looked like he might have ripped it away from him, but the referee says no. Can't tell if that's Neil Donahue or if that's Andrew Miller, but the side judge waved that one off. Now Chicago settles into what's almost a zone, and it is a zone, big hammer had to come from Shep across the field. No, it was Van Dusen. And now Shepard's got it. He's short of midfield, and he launches one up. Diesel's underneath it. Danny Miller jogging to catch up with it. The only question is, will it be in bounds? And it absolutely is. And then Max Shepard, hands above his head, exhorting the crowd. And we've got a pretty nice crowd out here tonight to get loud. And with 2:42 and the team separated by 4 goals at 19:15, the Thunderbird flag being run back and forth across the stands. Now's the time, if there is a time, for the Thunderbirds to mount a charge.
The score is 19-15, 2:42 left in the game. Fans, your birds need you more than ever now.
Little commentary going on in the stream. Nice to be able to interact with the listeners of 41.2 The Bird. And update on some injuries. Was mentioned here that Mark Fedorenko wasn't in the game tonight. And Ryan expressed the hope that it's not serious. It's not. Mark was out warming up. He's walking normally. And he just said that, he tweaked it in Spring League. It's a grade 1. Oh, Trimble on a nice diving bid on an in-cut by Pardo. But instead, the disc gets slung up to Goff. And now Giannis has it, throwing those big fakes. Gibson makes the strike cut. Trimble trying to keep up with him, but it's really hard to. And he throws a little backhand into the middle of the field, and a diving Goff tries to corral it. He can't. Thunderbirds have it back. A little over-the-top hammer to Van Dusen, and then Van Dusen pulls the trigger on that. Maybe it's Buss, actually. And now Trimble pops one up. Actually, it's a beautiful blading huck, but it has a little bit too much bite on it for number 84, the donkey, David Angeletti. And it falls helplessly in the end zone. And now we're inside of 2 minutes, 19:15. And I think it's probably all over but the shout at this point. Thunderbirds are not giving up, and that's very much to their credit. The team's going to show hustle all year long, and they are going to improve all year long. But Chicago just a little too much for them. And Chicago, I think, showing the division and the ultimate world that they're for real. And now running deep is Pardo, but instead the disc is pulled back down. Giannis has it now on the far sideline. It looks like he's being marked by Buss. Might be some contact over there. We get a call. And maybe it was a timeout. Looks like it was. Looks like the Thunderbirds defense has had enough. And so Coach Hammond says, why not? Let me get my another defensive unit onto the field. As Chicago calls a timeout. They're out of timeouts. T-Birds have one. I do doubt they'll be using it. So this game's going to be a loss. First one for the Thunderbirds this season. And Chicago will carry a winning record into their next week's matchup. And if you'll give me just a second, you can download this AUDL app. And you'll be able to do what I'm doing right now, which is to check scores and schedules. Take a look at who the Chicago Wildfire have coming up after their game tonight against the Thunderbirds. And look, that score's right there, 14-8. Good as you can get on here. Next week, they'll be away at Minnesota. And then they'll follow with a home game. They'll be back in Chicago on the 28th for you fans out there. It's a Saturday at 7:30, and they'll be playing Indianapolis. And that'll be a real test for those teams who are going to be fighting it out to challenge the Radicals and the Wind Chill, the top of the division. So lots of action. And then Chicago will be hosting the Thunderbirds on the 12th, and that'll be a Mother's Day game. So folks in Chicago, bring out your moms. So a lot of possibility for Chicago, but I'd say that the Thunderbirds have hung with them tonight. And what do the Thunderbirds have to work on in the coming weeks as they find themselves and grow into their roles? And some of these rookies grow into their game as pro players. They got to clean it up. I think it's the main thing that the Thunderbirds probably put at least 4. On the carpet that they didn't have to tonight. They made some questionable decisions, rushed a little bit, and they had some execution problems. And they're not a deep team. They don't have a huge roster, and so legs are going to get tired. And it looks like the Wildfire were about to add to their total. There was a shot to Barker in the end zone, but he dropped it. And so Ferdella picks it up, and now it's in the hands of Van Duzen. And he rifles a hammer across the field. Looks like Eddie Peters is going to drop that, puts it down on the Thunderbirds goal line, 25 seconds left. So stuff like that, Thunderbirds have to clean up. Looks like there was a timeout called, maybe before that throw, and it's got to come from Coach Hammonds because Chicago's out. And Ryan Heim and Andrew Miller confer, and they say, no, you can't save yourself with a timeout. Pat Hammond's looking to get his O team on the field one more time. Kurt Gibson going to come and pick this disc up. He's thrown no lefty thumbers tonight. He's got the disc on the goal line, looking around. A tightly covered Giannis pulls it down in front of Toll. There was a whistle, but Max Trotter appears to have caught a goal, and hands go up to signal it. And so it's 2015 in favor of Chicago, and we can see where the errors are, but those errors aren't simply a matter of execution. They're tired legs. It's feeling the pressure of having to carry the burden of the team when maybe you're not used to it. It's the intensity of playing the single game format. If maybe you're used to playing in a tournament situation, and in tournaments we all go as hard as we can, or we think we do, but you're not really giving 100% until you know that there's no next game. You've only got tonight. And I've heard AUDL players say again and again that the intensity just gets ratcheted up. There's also a bigger field to cover. This field is 80 yards long as opposed to 70. It's 53 yards wide as opposed to 40. Not everybody loves that, and it certainly taxes you. And when you're taxed and you're tired, you don't play as well. You make those drops that you wouldn't normally make. Mast has it, breaks, and he's been terrific all night. Van Duzen looking to throw deep, but there's nobody going deep. Watt looked like he was gonna. Now he looks to throw it back to Mast, and he might end with a stall. Pardo stalled him out. Folks from Chicago, hope you've enjoyed the game and enjoy the rest of your season. We'll be looking to come out and visit you. And hope I've been good about calling the names of your players and their numbers and getting to know them a little bit. We'll find out tomorrow on the video broadcast when that gets synced up. Now Woods has it. It's 2 seconds left. He has to complete one pass. He certainly does. Jack Shea will end the game with the disc in his hands. And as the horn sounds, the game finishes with the Thunderbirds losing to Chicago. Chicago coming out on top 20-15. So Mo Diarra being helped out on the field by Adnan Raslan, hopping out on the field. So that's one piece of news that the Thunderbirds will take away from this game that isn't great news. And we say goodnight tonight. We'll try to get down on the field and maybe get an interview or two, but the Thunderbirds unable to pull out a win against the Chicago team that is clearly superior.